What's happening with politics today, we saw in the video with Trump and Brexit and various other things going on. And I suppose just starting with that to try and understand, as Siobhan was saying, what's going on there, combination of economic insecurity, maybe cultural uncertainty, but particularly a loss of faith in politics, in politics as we know it, to actually reflect back to us what we're saying about the world we want to live in, so people looking for alternatives elsewhere. And I think that that's very true in relation to people's mass exit really from political institutions over the last 2 decades. If you look at it, things like voting rates, things like volatility in who people vote for, things like membership of political parties or participation in political parties, effectively what we understand to be representative democracy is in a decline. And we are trying, I think, collectively to imagine new forms of democratic participation. And that's important, I think, in terms of what the question relates to here is, what way can civil society realign itself, re-engage itself to play a role in what is emerging as other forms of democratic participation that are needed in the context of representative democracy really not being up to the job that it perhaps used to be up to. And that's in the sense of a shifting world where the social acceleration of change is incredibly intense for people. And I think we all feel that in our own lives, the battery of change that comes at us. And I think one of the areas there, and Siobhan mentioned technology, but I think one of the values that people are reacting against in the various ways that they can is the degree of growing inequality in the world, and growing inequality of income, but particularly I think growing inequality of wealth. And I was really struck by Oxfam's really recent research where they showed really that 8 men now own, in terms of wealth, they own as much as the poorest 50% of the world combined. And who those 8 men are relates very much to power and politics. They tend to be the owners of very large technological companies that control a lot of new media outlets, and they have a very strong relationship to power and corporate power. So people see this happening. They see power being pulled away from what they understood to be the centre of power, representative politics, and they're looking for other ways to reconnect with that. And I think people's values are being expressed in how they feel about the kind of world they're in, the kind of society they want, and they know that they don't want what they've seen emerging. And I think if we kind of try and understand what's happening with politics, there's some optimism as well. I mean, I know the video focused on Brexit and Trump, but you know, it could have probably done before. But Macron's victory in France is very interesting in terms of what he's saying about what way politics needs to be reimagined. And he's talking about power and politics as a permanent sense of deliberation and listening and engaging. So a much more participative form of politics, a much more engaged form of politics is what people seem to be demanding and what some political movements seem to be responding to. And I think if we try and then ask, well, what's happening in Ireland in relation to that? And in some respects, Ireland is a bit of an outlier in all of this because our politics hasn't been changing to the extent that we've seen in France, in Britain, in America. And to some degree in Ireland, the centre is holding. And we haven't had that experience of populism on the left or the right. And there's lots of reasons for that. I mean, we've had a lot of nationalist politics anyway, which would be maybe a natural meeting ground for populist politics. That space is already taken and quite well filled in Ireland. Our electoral system, our kind of localist, clientelistic political culture is already quite populist in style. So to some degree, maybe we've filled that space with our ordinary politics. And maybe that's a really good thing. And if there has been redistribution of power, it seems to be happening within left politics rather than from the centre to left politics. We're not really seeing a Podemos moment or anything like that. So no great significant shift in the right or the left in terms of political realignment. But one thing I think we need to be really mindful of in Ireland, and that we may see some political response emerging from, is the type of generational inequality that we're actually experiencing in Ireland. And it's maybe even noticeable in the room, like the age profile here is such that we're not really going to hear the voices of the young people who at a very significant number of levels are feeling quite excluded from housing, from jobs, the impact of emigration, still scarring from unemployment, but also a cultural exclusion maybe sometimes as well. So I think we really need to be careful to listen to engage with, and to bring in that generation of Irish people. Because if we look at Corbyn, if we look at the Bernie Sanders, if we look at what's happening in France, the future is in the future generation and how they will engage in reimagining politics. And if we're not really engaging with them, we're not really playing a role, I think, effectively as civil society. I think the other thing that's really important for us as civil society is understanding the challenge that civil society has in a more marketised civil society, a civil society that, due to funding or due to its old cultural orientation, is becoming itself more managerial, more metriced, and maybe that gets in the way of trying to reimagine the political role that civil society might play, and certainly its relationship to political society. So in answering the question, I would be fairly firm that civil society not only has a role to play, but has an obligation to play a role in enabling participative, deliberative types of democracy, where society can debate about what it wants, the types of things that Siobhan was just talking about. And I think that's particularly important in breaking silences and challenging myths and narratives. I'm quite taken even in the debate about housing at the moment, that there's a really serious debate there right now about the degree to which Ireland will find its solutions in the market, or whether we can pull back to other forms of either societal or the state-led responses to the housing crisis. That's a really big political debate that we need to have in Ireland about a number of sectors, but particularly urgent in housing right now. And we all have a role to play in making those debates happen and making our voices heard and enabling other people's voices be heard. So I do think if civil society is trying to imagine itself, that there is a need to see how we can make new alliances with each other, with political society, with new actors, and particularly, I would stress, with young people coming through around issues of, say, environmental sustainability, around issues of equality and identity, but also around solidarity and redistribution. And I think a lot of that is about trying to find new ways of articulating. What I really do see is there's a public value on the role of the state and public investment, and there's a public scepticism about the increased role of the market in all of our lives, and we need to help articulate that back, help create the debate about that, because that really is at the fulcrum of the kind of future that we will all live in. And I think if people like civil society actors in this room aren't engaging in that kind of debate, I'm not really sure who will be. So we leave that space to others, and we may do that at our peril, I think, as has been found out in other political spaces around the world.